Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney, and I'm very excited about our guest today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, but first, I got to tell the story that she's sick of hearing me tell, but I tell it to everybody because it was such a fun moment for me in my life. Take yourself back to right after COVID, really. I moved to a town and I was here just a little bit earlier, but we hadn't seen anybody or met many people because of COVID. And then a realtor in town invited me to a party that she was having to welcome all the new people that had just moved into town. So I go to this party and I think, oh, great, because I don't have lot of friends yet and so forth. I go to this party and I see this woman, bright, sunny, just sparkling, so fun. And I immediately hear her accent, which is a little bit of a Southern accent there, and I recognize whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, somebody from around my home region, So I start talking to her and we sit next to each other and I just immediately love her. And I'm like, who is this person? And I feel like a quick affinity, like I've known her for longer than the past 5 minutes that it seems like. So we're talking and I'm trying to figure out yeah, but where are you from? Do we know each other? How do we know each other? So forth. Anyway, as we go, turns out that this beautiful woman, savvy woman sitting next to me is my anchor woman from when I went to college in Philly, and she was my anchor woman on the television. And it was so cool. I felt like I had met a celebrity that I also thought was a friend. And that's what I think every good kind of daily anchor person that you listen to kind of gives you that feeling right away. And so to meet her in my town and to be able to become friends with her was really exciting for me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will give you the intro now that tells you a little bit more about her than just how my initial moment with me. But today I am so excited that I got her in here because I'm joined by the one and only Monica Malpass, a veteran journalist and anchor who has spent her career helping audiences make sense of what matters in real time with credibility and calm, right? She's just smooth as butter. For more than 3 decades, Monica was a fixture in Philadelphia at ABC Action News, where she served as an anchor and reporter and became known for sharp interviews, breaking news coverage, and thoughtful political conversations, including moderating the station's public affairs program Inside Story. These days, Monica continues her work in business and financial media as an anchor and with platforms including the NASDAQ, FinTech.TV, and News to the Street. And she's also shaping the next generation of storytellers as an adjunct professor at Hunter College, teaching reporting and writing. Monica has lived what so many leaders are navigating. Our audience is a lot of leaders, managers, people in the business world, and you may be thinking, what does an anchor person have to do with that? Well, let me tell you, not only does she interview some of the most brightest and interesting leaders that are out there, so she's talked to so many of them, and not just in politics, but in business, especially in the work that she does down on Wall Street now. But she's also bringing up the next generation of those voices that's going to be there, which I think is pretty cool. And when you're in that world for so long, she has had to stay steady under pressure, communicate with clarity, and really build trust when stakes are high, and she has to do it quick. And I think as leaders, we can all learn from that. So I'm excited to dig into what leadership looks like when you're in the spotlight and what all of us can learn from that. So welcome, Monica.
Hi, great to be with you, Christine. Thank you so much for asking me.
Sure. So let's just jump in because I have so many things I want to get your thoughts on. But I'm going to start with kind of a big opening question for you, put you on the spot. What do you think you're most proud of in how you've led across your career?
I think it's 2 things. The first one is getting a high profile job is not easy, obviously, and keeping it for decades. So I think I'm proudest of the longevity and the fact that I was allowed to, but also that I pursued growing within that position. So starting out as a morning anchor / reporter, I would report half the day and anchor the mornings, but then growing to full-time anchor and then evening anchor, and then putting on the political hat, which they were kind enough to let me be the first main woman to do. So I loved all of that, but you have to be willing to put yourself yourself out there and ask for those things. So for just as many of the things in all of the stations where I've worked that I got, I also was told no at least twice as
Mm.
often. So it's my willingness, and I hope your listeners' willingness to keep going, to continue asking, and not to be a nudge in the side of somebody so they can't stand when you walk through the door of their office. So they're like, oh, you again, we know you want everything. One of my bosses actually told me that. I didn't want everything, but I did have specific interests, and I didn't want to just stand by the wayside and let years and decades go by without any personal growth. So I think I'm proudest of the longevity, but also the growth.
Yeah. That's cool. It's interesting because when I look at your career, and I know a lot of those things that you did, but not all of them, but I know that you have interviewed really big people like President Obama, for instance. Like, that's one that I remember. You did a pretty in-depth interview with President Obama, and I'm just curious because I think that that's like a big swing, right? I don't know if you asked for that or if they gave you that, but I think that's really important for people. How do you get that, right? And then also, how do you stay calm in the moment of like this big moment of interviewing somebody who's the most powerful person in the world,
Right.
at the time?
Well, the reality of it is that you have to build with baby steps, like with anything. So I knew within the first year of being at the station in Philadelphia that I wanted to have an impact on more than just everyday news coverage, although that's highly important, as well as breaking news. I wanted a specialty. And so I decided that, we already had reporters. Every station generally has a medical reporter and a business person, as Jane King was for us. She's a local name in the national coverage of news, and my colleague at the NASDAQ and the stock exchange. So there were already specialties that were taken. And one of them that wasn't full-time taken was politics. There were several gentlemen who were doing our coverage, but they had done it for years. It seemed to be sort of old hat to them. And I knew that at some point when they would retire, that there might be a chance to join that coverage, not exclusively, but I would be one of the voices. So I started looking into that and asking, may I substitute on that program? May I help with the occasional debates? May I be one of the people that's on staff as a reporter to go to conventions, political conventions that we cover, and inaugurations, that kind of thing. So I added that on to my everyday duties, which meant extra hours and extra prep, but I wanted to have a specialty. So I wasn't just a garden variety anchor and reporter. And I think that's important, to have a niche where you are a go-to person, because at some point, as I said, someone will retire or will move to another location, and that will open up, and that's what happened. So when I got the Obama interview, I had been in the queue for, I'm going to call it 12 years, doing medium to average level political coverage in addition to my regular job. I, just was a natural person that they would ask. So that was a huge honor. But to your second question, the way you stay calm with that is just, I believe, number one, over preparation. So I'm that girl that reads and studies and writes notes and has note cards. One of my bosses, I don't think he meant it as a joke, but anyway, I thought it was kind of funny. He said, don't forget your recipe cards when you come to the interview. So I guess he just hadn't had that many women who were covering that. I wasn't offended. I just thought it was kind of funny. And they are the same size, index cards, as a recipe card. So I brought my recipe cards with me, but I didn't want them with Obama in particular. I was at the White House one-on-one in the map room, and we were going to be standing. I didn't want to be holding cards. So I made sure that at home I had practiced enough that I knew them. I memorized them. I left them behind because I didn't want it to sort of be a white card distraction on the video. So I walked into the room with no cards, and he could not have been more welcoming and down to earth, and was lovely. So we had about 10-minute conversation, and we started with a couple of the topics that he had requested that we talk about, a couple of bills he was trying to get passage on. But then it was opened up for the last 6 or 7 minutes to any topic. And so I was able to ask him, 7 or 8 other things, and he answered every one. So I felt really honored to be there. And to this day, I appreciate that. I got to interview 6 other presidents, but most of those were not when they were president, obviously. It was when they had retired, they were past presidents, or they were senators, future presidents, like Senator Biden. I covered him for years. Delaware is part of the Philadelphia market, as is Southern Jersey. So I've interviewed a lot of people who held the Oval Office at some point, but not all at the moment when I interviewed them.
That's cool. I think, it's so interesting what you said about your recipe cards, because I love my index cards too. I mean, God forbid you take away my index cards. I have different colored ones. Before I go into a meeting, I always have my little index card I look at beforehand. But I think what's interesting about it for a lot of young people that I'm seeing, and you work in colleges, so I'm curious if you see this too, is that their version of the index card is their phone,
Yeah.
right? So now you have your speech or you have your talking points or whatever on your phone. I've done it before too. And then
Yes.
you see them with their phone when they present, often in front of their face and scrolling, right?
Right.
And it's so funny to me, and I don't know if it's because I'm an older person, but it's like I know those are their version of cards, but to me it's like they're on their phone scrolling, and maybe it's
Right.
because I have teenagers and I just have that presumption. But I loved what you said about you did not want to have your preparation was so intense that not only did you write down your cards, but you practiced it at home so that you could do it without that. And I do
Yes.
think that that is that next step that people have to look at because we rely on those phones for our notes now. And it does put a distraction in front of your face and in front of
Yes.
your body.
And if you're not looking at the camera or looking at the person you're interviewing, then your audience is following where your eyes are. So they're not looking at them either. They're looking at your phone as you are. They're being distracted. And now they've lost the topic and they, are kind of losing interest, to be honest with you, because you gave them an excuse to look away.
To
So I didn't
look
want to,
right.
yeah, give them any excuse to look away. I wanted it to be a one-on-one, literally 2 feet apart from the president, and I wanted them to be as focused for those 10 minutes as I was. So I would say to people, although, I use my phone sometimes too, the trick with the phone is now you've got to scroll up, scroll down, and look and see that you didn't scroll past it and then go back. And, so I still rely on both methods, but I would say that know your material so well that you either have an acronym in your head that you're going to remember the word, coffee, because you're going to ask about some kind of whatever car imports, and then oxygen levels in the environment, whatever your acronym is in your head to remind you, have that at the ready so that you don't need the phone and you don't need the cards.
That's a great tip. One of the things we love to try to do for people on this show is exactly what you're doing naturally, which is some stories and then some very actionable tips. And I think that's a great one that I haven't even talked about before, like that you reminded me just to have that in your head so that if you forget, because our brains
Yes.
will forget under pressure, that you can go back to that. And I mean, I think people would be fine with you taking a minute to remember rather than just having you look at a phone the entire time. But it
Right.
does take practice. That's a really good point. I was curious, just kind of on that line, what are other simple behaviors that build trust and confidence in a room very quickly? Because one of the things I think about your profession and who you are is that when you walk into a room, people need to be able to trust you or stay calm with you or know that they're in good hands, probably even now. And how do you create that pretty quickly? Are there any tips?
Well, I would say I have 3 or 4 kind of ideas for people, and maybe they know them, but it might not be self-evident. And I teach at Hunter College, as you mentioned, in the fall, reporting and writing, but I also teach at the London School of Journalism in the summers and online, the rest of the year via Zoom. So I have both sides of the pond, if you want to call it that, where I'm seeing what students of this
Mm,
generation are interested in and need and what they think. And what they don't know is how to walk into a room and command the room. So I try to teach that as part of my classroom sort of practicality, the tips that they can take out of the door with them. But what's interesting to me is that you have to practice. And I did this with my own teenagers. They think if you just explain it to them, oh, I got it. But they don't realize under pressure, nobody's got it. When you're actually looking in the eyes of the very important CEO or president or whomever it might be, even a bereft person that you're interviewing after a tragedy in their family, you are now distracted, as I would hope you would be, by the humanity of that moment. And so you have to have at the ready not only your information that you've taken to memory and you just know it like the back of your hand. You know it as well as you know your name, your birthday, and your address. You just know it. It's a part of your fiber. That's how much you've studied it. But you also have the ability to do a few things, which is smile to buy a little time. If you smile, I just bought 5 seconds. And that immediately makes the person that you're interviewing comfortable because you're not looking vexed, like, oh my gosh, what was my acronym? Oh my goodness, what was my note? You're smiling. So that warms up the environment, the atmosphere. So they relax and then you relax because they look more welcoming. So the first thing is be ready with a genuine smile as a starting place. And then second, take a moment to just have a little small talk with the person so that they can get your vibe, you get theirs, as you would if you were just meeting someone new. And then I would say, absolutely, if you're before an audience or if you're in a room where you're making a PowerPoint presentation, I think you should have perfect posture, not ramrod straight that's so stiff that you look like you just came off a factory assembly line, but where you have a command of your own body and energy. So you walk out there as if you own the place. Now, you've never been there. You have to have done this enough times in your life that the first time I walked into a television station, I was shaking, but my face had a smile and my body, except for my knees, which were shaking, had I would love to join this group. It's the perfect balance, I like to say, of being quietly in control. So I don't like it to be cocky energy. I don't like it to be am better than all of you energy. I hate that kind of energy. What I love is the I belong here energy, and I would love to join your successful team energy. I'm worthy of that energy. So it is a quiet confidence that is not so quiet that it can't be seen. It has to be seen in your body language. But you walk in, and we practice this in my classrooms, where we walk in as if we've been there 100 times. It's not our first time at the rodeo. We also shake hands, and we have to do this. I'm telling you, we have to practice this like for 15 minutes with each student. They shake hands, different ones, too hard, too soft, like a fish, like a steel gun. You know, we don't want any of that. We want something that is a strong in between. So you absolutely, with your body, your posture, as well as your handshake and your smile, convey, I'm comfortable here. I belong here. This is not imposter syndrome. We can all do much better with me as a member of your team. And so your body has already won the day.
I love that. That's great. And I love that you're practicing it with them, because I think that we don't ask our young people to do that as much as we should. And so many of them were also affected by COVID and so forth. And so they missed out on some of those
Yes.
kind of social graces, so to speak, that we all had to learn from our parents in the old days. So I love that you're taking them through that. And I'm sure that that's maybe, if they just take away that from the class, that's huge. Talk about going into a job interview, going into your annual performance reviews, talking about how you enter a meeting. If you're asked to come to a meeting and the CEO is there of your corporation, how are you walking in? Are you nervous? Are you fidgeting with your phone? Are you having pretty good relaxed but upright posture and smiling? That's a great tip. I love that. And I
the
love
other
how
thing
you break it
is,
down.
oh, I'm sorry, is eye
No.
contact. I find that this generation, I'll say it as this because I have teenagers who are 15 and a 25-year-old son as well. 3 sons that, he is really, the 25-year-old has mastered it, but the 15s were still working on it. We had to practice for literally 15, 20 minutes how you shake a hand while looking in somebody's eyes and smiling. So you have to master all 3 of them at the same time. You don't look fake with your head then down and now your smile is lost. You have to be able to smile genuinely, not a fake over smile nor an under smile. But you have to have a real warm smile while you're looking in the eyes with your hand out, ready to go. It has to be the whole thing. So they would get one of the elements. And then I'd have to say, well, you looked in my eyes, but your hand was like, so we had to practice because they just went and got their first little jobs at a local store, which I thought would be great experience in life, social skills that they had not received because they were COVID kids. So anyway, they had to learn. I made them, they were getting mad at me because I said, no, you got the handshake and you got the smile, but you were looking down. Now let's do it again because you get one shot, the smile, the eyes, and the handshake. Let's go. Keep doing it until you just feel like, I could do this all day long.
When you were growing up, I just am curious because first of all, I'm so impressed that you did that with your kids. I'm going to test my kids this weekend, see if they pay any attention to me, or I'll send them over to your house. Actually, I might do that. That's a great idea.
No problem.
If you get a knock on your door. I'm just curious, when you were growing up, right, did you do anything like, were you a theater kid, or did you do debate? What was the experience foundationally that you had that made you so good at knowing these things, or being able, so that you knew what you needed to practice,
Well, I was the, sort of extrovert of my family. I have 3 brothers, all of whom were shy. Now they're not shy, but they were as kids. So I was the non-shy child that, they thought was an oddity / funny. So I was a ballet dancer first, and then ballet. I have to emphasize that. Sometimes I say it so fast, people think I said belly dancer. I'm a classically trained ballet dancer. So I was on stage. I knew how to at least look at the audience and have a command of my body, even when things were going wrong, when you miss the steps nerves, when you
Mm.
miss the cue, when you don't jump into his arms at the right moment. So there, you had to learn quickly how to repair that mistake on stage in front of an audience and keep going and finish, even though it was not perfect and you know that you stunk at it that day, but you had to at least have your game face on for throughout the performance. So that came from being on stage as a young
Mm-hmm.
person. And then I did do theater as a middle school and high school kid, and the ballet troupe at UNC Chapel Hill. So I have been a performer, if you want to call
Mm-hmm.
it that. But I always found radio and television interesting and only started playing a little bit around with that as internships and volunteer activities when I was in high school as the school editor of the yearbook, and then on in college as a UNC Chapel Hill on the student paper and the student radio station.
So interesting. It makes sense to me because, I went to, when I was in Philadelphia, I went to a school with a lot of different artists, and the dancers are the most disciplined of all of the arts. I'll tell you that much, right? So it makes sense. Like the amount of discipline that those dancers would have was incredible to me and kind of eye-opening. But I think you learn so much through whatever those foundational experiences are that we bring with us. And so the amount of preparation that you do is probably so ingrained from that ballet background. Do you know what I mean? Talk about like, and even of dance forms, one that takes an incredible amount of preparation and calm under pressure,
Yes. And it
Yeah.
also, even if you thought you got it perfectly, obviously we've all had instructors or coaches or whatever in our lives if you've done sports or the arts, and they saw other things that you didn't nail, and hopefully they are kind about it, but not everybody is. So some of my instructors would say, I don't care what you think. What I saw was garbage. Do it again, and do it not just again, but do it 50 times again, so that every single time you can repeat it, on command, on cue, and you nailed it. We don't want a 9, we want a 10, and we want it every day. So they're pretty demanding. And I think that gets ingrained, hopefully not in a cruel way, but, we just expect a high level of performance regularly.
Yeah, I was in high school. I was on the speech and debate team, and I would do the speech tournaments, and one year I had made the national tournament. And when you get out in your regular competition, like when you're finally out, you get to go into what they call it, like, I don't know, you go into poetry all of a sudden. So you have to have like your backup, you have to have a poem ready to read or whatever. And I was doing something from The Wife of Bath's Tale. I'll never forget it. And the performance, like you got up and you had to perform it in this church. And I think we were in Nashville or something. And I got up onto the stage and I had, it's the 80s. So I had a big dress with big shoulder pads, silk dress, high heels, pantyhose, the whole thing. I get up, the big hair, as we do in Texas, right? Closer to God, bigger the hair, closer to God. I get up on that stage and I have my big, and you were allowed to read it, thank God, because this wasn't the other stuff I had memorized, but because this was, when you got out, you got to do this as, kind of consolation prize. And anyway, I was in the finals of poetry, and I get there and I get up there and I think, oh, I know this. This is fun. It has different voices. It's, kind of bawdy and big like me. And I get up there and I start reading, and then my knees start shaking, and I'm in these high heels or whatever. And it's out of control. But because I was so practiced and I had done this for so many years now, that I literally could read the script with all my different voices, my legs shaking uncontrollably. Like, I'm like, there's no way they don't notice this. But in my head, I could have an entire conversation with myself on try to calm that knee down while I'm doing all these voices and stuff. And I thought to myself, wow, the brain is working on all these different levels. You know what I mean? Like I'm going, what are you doing, Christine? Stop shaking, breathe, do this. But meanwhile, I'm doing, and then I die, in my horrible Dick Van Dyke version of my Cockney accents or whatever.
Nice.
But anyway, I just thought, wow, that's amazing. And so now when I go into any meeting or anything, I'm like, I don't care. Anything can happen. Somehow my brain will figure out how to deal with this in the moment,
I think it's helpful. I'm
practice.
sorry to interrupt. Yes,
No.
besides practice is to have a backup plan. And the backup plan has to be as practiced as the front-facing plan. So I always say to my kids, even in just a conversation, as you said, if you happen to be in a meeting and that day the president of the company was visiting unbeknownst to you and stopped by and was watching your mid-level or low-level meeting, I think you have to have at the ready a few conversation points, a few cogent interesting, even social points that you can say to almost anybody. And this is hard for my students, but also for my three sons. I am the extrovert again. My older son is extroverted, but my twins are not as extroverted. They would be on the shy side. So they say, well, Mom, you can talk to a tree. You can talk to a flagpole. And I can, but the point is, I want them to have at the ready one or two things that they can say to almost anybody that is friendly, that is intelligent. It's not just how's the weather, or yeah, hey, great. So what'd you do today? It has to be one more thing. So always have at the ready one more thing. Even if you don't think that person read the new New York Times bestseller, you read a little review of it, and you can say, hey, are you into whatever the topic is? Are you into, technology? Are you into AI? Are you into gardening? Are you into cooking? Did you see the new Martha Stewart bestseller on, the New York Times list? She's talking about how to, so be ready with a couple of things, and they'll say, no, I'm not into cooking. You can say you should be, because then listen, you can do what I'm going to do this weekend, which is make your own profiteroles. So it might have nothing to do with anything they're interested in, but you were able to help them A, relax, B, relate to you, and C, like you. They like you because you reached out and you tried to connect with them even when there was no clear way to do it.
Oh, that's a great tip. I mean, really to share something I mean, more than just what was on what your YouTuber is talking about, but like from something. I love that, to like that's a great reason to kind of educate yourself in a bunch of things so that you have something ready to go. It helps with so-called small talk, but also to make yourself a little more memorable and interesting. That's a great tip. I love that you're practicing this stuff with young people. My question is too, in journalism is kind of known, I guess, for questions, right? And we talk a lot on this podcast, but also in the work that we do with companies and with leaders about the importance of curiosity and the power of questions. And I was just curious, like, do you get a lot of questions that are already kind of handed to you, or do you create a lot of the questions yourselves? And like, how do you go about finding out what are good questions, and then how to scaffold them? Because I think leaders need, a lot of times they think they have to have all the answers, but a lot of times the best ones just have the better questions.
Yes.
And I was curious a little bit how you go into that process for yourself.
So I do both. I ask if I'm interviewing a CEO, as I did twice this week and will do again, information from their communications staff, what they want to talk about. This was the same prep as what I did for President Obama and all the other politicians. I ask for what is it they're passionate about, so that I can be versed in that subject and ask them about it. But I also have a list, and I'm telling you, it has to be triply long, of what you think you might need, because sometimes it's a one-word answer and now you've got another 10 minutes. So you need to have a long list of things that you're just interested in about them as a person, as a politician or a doctor or a teacher or whatever they are, so that you can have an intelligent conversation, both micro and macro, but also listen to their answers. Because what's been huge in my career is sometimes they'll go off and answer something and they'll add one little thing at the end that was not a part of any question I had researched. It was not part of any of the communications, missives that had been sent to the newsroom, nor was it part of anything that I expected, but they said one little thing at the end. And I was like, well, let's hear more about that. Sounds interesting. And you really just get them talking about something that they're passionate about, and it can lead to a whole other avenue of discussion. The other thing you have to be ready for, which happened all the time, is that they Shanghai the interview. They take over and talk about something that had nothing to do with your question. So politicians and business people go to seminars to learn how to control an interview and be the, person, the voice that's the main voice. They want to use those 7 or 8 minutes for their own best interest, obviously, in their company's platform. You might have a different area of interest that you're interviewing them about as journalists. So let's say they want to talk about offshore drilling. You want to talk about high taxes. Well, they'd rather go back to the offshore drilling. So you say, well, let's talk about the tax increase that you just raised, 10% more on the working class, and it's got people up in arms. How do you defend that? And they go, that's a great question, Christine. And here's what I'll get back to you on that, but let's talk about that offshore drilling project. So they'll go like this, left turn, right turn all the time. And you have to be ready with a similar question, almost the same question, with new words 3 or 4 different ways, right? So that doesn't sound like you just read the same note again. You came back around to the thing that was the most compelling question you want answered, and you hold them to it. So you have to be ready for them to take over the interview. Or if they don't give you but a 1 or 2 word answer, like, you're right, move on, right? You have to have a backup second question and a follow-up third question. Well, what about the fact that, the second level of the tax kicks in January and people aren't ready for that? And how about when June comes around? Now it's 15%. You have to have several tiers of questions ready to go, but also listen to their answers.
I love that because, I mean, how many times does that happen to people with your employees? Like you want to tell them, give them feedback on something or tell them, what about what happened here in this problem? And then they start skewing it to like something completely different. And then you get lost and you're like, wow, I never ended up talking to them or debriefing about what happened here. They got me off track somehow. So I think that is a really important skill, even if you're not a journalist, is like, how do we keep it? How do we pull it back without insulting them? You gave me an idea when you were just talking about something that I hadn't even thought to ask you, but you mentioned a minute ago about how you just interviewed a couple of CEOs this week. And you do interview a lot of CEOs still in your career, a lot. And I was just curious if there is what you've learned through that process, or if there's a little nuggets of learning that some have taught you more than others, or somebody that was really interesting and why and what they, what they kind of brought to you.
I tell you, I learned so much every single interview. It fascinates me. And I'm, like you said, a very curious person. So I want to know a lot of things about everything. So I want to be a master of some things, but I want to also be a generalist. And I love studying topics based on whatever their, corporation or company is. So this week I interviewed a doctor who happened to create a fiber optic tube, but also it has camera on the end so that they can implant feeding tubes without accidentally piercing your lung instead of implanting it in your stomach. And you would think that seems self-evident, but what happens is literally probably 300,000 times a year or more in hospitals across America and across the world, they're implanted incorrectly, doing more damage and causing the patient to be longer in the hospital or to have worse symptoms and possibly die. To get it wrong when your organs are that close together, and think about a child or a preemie, and they have to have the tiniest little, fiber optic feeding tubes and other kinds of tubes going into a small little body. So they came up with a way to guide them with little pinpoint cameras so that the entire process, they can see where is the tube. And if it starts to puncture the wrong organ or, into a vein or an artery, that they can quickly reroute it. So I found that fascinating. I had, an older mom who's needed a feeding tube. I've had my children when they were small at birth were underweight a little bit and had to have some assistance. So it's happened in my life. It happens all the time, but you don't think about the damage, the collateral damage that can happen from a honest mistake, right? But these are life and death kinds of things. So that was an interesting one, but there've been so many. When, we talk about solar power, that was another interview I did this week, and how a big company that's building a new manufacturing plant in Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma, is going to be our number one lithium battery source. Instead of us always outsourcing those to overseas, we won't be reliant on international trade for our lithium batteries to power our phones and devices. So anyway, fascinating. Just every topic to me is one new area that I want to know so much about.
That you keep yourself, talk about what a way to go through life, to learn all the time, to just keep learning about things, to keep, not only I'm sure knowing you after listening to you, how much preparation you do on these topics, but then also to be in the moment and listen to folks and learn from them. And that makes it, what a fun job that you still have.
It really is.
You can sit back and never work again. You've done so much in your life, but that you keep going and you keep teaching. And I'm just so impressed with you, Monica, as a person, but also as a fellow leader. And I'm going to leave today learning a lot from you. So I thank you for that.
Oh, well, you made my day. Thank you. I'm flattered. And I know you talk to a lot of people, so I feel like I'm in good company with you and with them. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. If you guys want to check out more about Monica, where can they find you these days? If they can't go to your classes, where can they find you on their television screens?
Well, there are a number of outlets. It depends on what each company is willing to pay for the platform. So our basic entry level is YouTube TV. You can see all my interviews on it. The company's called New to the Street, meaning new to Wall Street. These are companies that have just had an IPO to make their companies go public. So they want more publicity about that. And maybe sometimes they need more angel investors or other investment arms. So new to the street.
Good
If you
one.
just Google that, then all the interviews will come up. We're also on Bloomberg TV, Newsmax, Fox Business. We are on all of those platforms. So this Saturday, I'll have one of my interviews on Bloomberg TV. It just depends. You would Google any of those and they'll come up. But also, I want to add one other little thing, and I think this is true the rest of your life, that if you want to keep growing and adding new venues or new experiences or new opportunities, just keep asking. The London School of Journalism, I was interested in doing something while my boys are away at summer camp for 6-7 weeks every summer. They go to a camp in the Adirondacks, and I love travel. So I thought, why don't I do a little something that's also professional development? So I started Googling. I happen to love everywhere, but Europe and Asia. So I Googled journalism schools and came up with a few that do have summer programs. And then I thought, well, maybe this year, this was 3 years ago, I'll try London, and that would be a good springboard to Europe and all kinds of places, the Middle East. So I Googled London journalism summer courses, and 3 places came up that offer them. And I sent a resume and just cold called, asked each of them, do you have any need? This was in January, before June, July. Do you have any need for a visiting professor for, 1, 2, 3 classes, whatever your needs are? I'll be in your area this summer and would love to be part of your team. And 2 of them said no, as often happens, and 1 of them said maybe. So a maybe, I also teach this to my students, a maybe has to be a yes for you. So in your mind, you heard yes. They said maybe, you heard yes. So you keep kindly and gently, but with energy, pursuing that maybe, and say, well, what would that take? What would that look like? When would you need someone? What are the courses you'd be interested in having someone like me teach? Here are areas I'm an expert in, but I have other areas I could learn and get up to speed on. You become what they need without selling your soul, obviously, but in a professional sense. And then they said, well, actually, this summer we have an opening for just 1 class, but if you're going to be in London, we'll let you have. And so I actually just cold call, ask for that job. And that's how now I teach. It's great.
Yay. I love it. That's a great story. That is a great story. A maybe is a yes, and just ask. Awesome way to end our morning here. So thank you so much, Monica, for joining us. Check her out because she is full of great tips and information. And
thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Yes, and wonderful.
All right. And the link to the YouTube channel will be in the description of the episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm just
all right. Have a great day. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye, Christine.